Hi, my name is Justin. I'm the media arts pastor here at CityRise. And if you're tuning in thinking you're going to get a live stream today, it's not happening at our Bellaire campus. It is spring break, and we are short on volunteers and staff because they're out with their families and traveling. And so in order to give some bandwidth for our staff to focus on the in-house worship services today, we decided to pre-record this sermon. So if you need some music and some singing to connect with God before you engage in his word, pause this, open up another browser window, go find something, either an old worship service of one of ours, or you can open up your favorite music app on your phone and listen to some worship music to get your heart right before we jump in. We are going to be continuing our Still Standing series. Psalm 37:4 says this: "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." And so the meditation we just did encouraged us to list the things about God that we love most. The feelings of delight or enjoyment we have in life are often rooted in our love for that thing or person. So when we're talking about delighting ourselves in God, we need to think about why we love him. We need to think about what reasons we have to love him. If we delight in something or someone, it should be easy to list the reasons why. You know, I delight in my wife because she cares about everyone's feelings. She wants to make sure everyone feels loved and cared for. Like, she's just got a nurturing heart, and I love that about her. I delight in my kids because they make me laugh. Every day they say something silly or just outlandish, or they do something funny, but they bring me joy. I delight in them. Sometimes they disobey, and sometimes they make me want to pull my hair out, but on a daily basis, I'm reminded that I love them just because of the joy they bring me. Or I delight in board games because they bring my friends together for an evening of fun and getting to know each other. I delight in ice cream because it tastes good, okay? But if you're like me, listing off the reasons we delight in things and people in our lives is easier than listing off the reasons we love God. Sometimes it's just natural to list why we love our spouses or our favorite activities or even our job. When we sit down and try to think about why we love God, it might not be that simple. Don't kick yourself if you struggled to list those things in that meditation we just did. The very nature of the fallen man built a wall between us and God. We're not experiencing God the way he intended in the garden. Sin has built a wall between us. And so we're never going to as readily experience God's love and enjoyment that we have for him this side of heaven. It's just not going to happen. We're going to be overwhelmed by sin nature. We're overwhelmed by the stress of the world. We're overwhelmed by things and people that are far more tangible and immediate than God in many ways. And so it's not wild for you to sit here and think, man, I really struggled to think about the reasons why I love God. It's not your fault, okay? We have to work to delight in God. But even though it's not your fault, that doesn't give you an excuse not to try. Working toward delight. Some of you are thinking, what the heck? Like, why should I have to work towards delight in God? If I have to work toward loving and enjoying something, is it really love and enjoyment? And if you feel that true love is only true if it always comes naturally, you were either unmarried or still on your honeymoon. Thanks for tuning in today as you're celebrating your nuptials, if that's you. Of course, there are going to be sparks and moments of love and delight that you don't have to work for. That is absolutely normal. Early on, there's a lot of them. Kids and life and jobs kind of like take it out of you, and maybe you miss some of those moments with your spouse. But throughout your marriage, your feelings of love will come and go, and sometimes out of nowhere. But sometimes you have to be diligent to create moments where those feelings of love can be fostered and built and develop. The more life drags you down, the harder you must work to make time to delight in your spouse. And our faith is the same way. Feelings of love and enjoyment with God are going to come and go, no doubt. For instance, think about the moment you became a Christian. For a lot of us, that was a really exciting day. I remember my heart beating really fast. I remember this sense of relief. I had been worried about what death meant and what was going to happen to me after I died. And so I suddenly had this eternal rest, like peace. Like, I was so excited. It was not hard to delight in God in that moment. I'm sure for you as well when you became a Christian. Or maybe, you may have other times in your life where you felt enjoyment or you felt love of God more naturally. For me, when I first felt called to ministry as a high school student, out of nowhere, my excitement and enthusiasm for God grew because of that calling. Or in college, when I stumbled into the best Christian community I could have ever found, the relationships and the friendships I had with people that loved Jesus inspired a delight in me in my faith. or when I connected with a spiritual mentor who walked with me through life and encouraged me, inspired me. My faith, my relationship with God was exciting. I knew why I loved him. It was so clear to me. Or serving on a mission trip in France with students, or discipling teenagers over breakfast at Whataburger. There's a million little moments in my life where my joy and my love of God came naturally. It wasn't hard. But then life happens. Things get harder. I graduated college and left those Christians that I loved so much behind. We went all over the nation, and I lost that Christian community. The fun parts in ministry that I love, started to get outweighed by some of the hard parts in ministry, and my joy and enthusiasm for God waned and went away a little bit. My responsibility to care for my family took away opportunities to minister to teenagers and encourage them in their walk, or just distance in life circumstances disconnected me from my mentor who had meant so much to me. So life made it harder to naturally enjoy God, to delight in him. My delight in God waned as my Christ-centered experiences morphed and disappeared because of life circumstances. And it's not your fault, though. You are probably in the same place. It's not your fault if the things that brought you joy in God come and go. Until you die, delighting in God will be sporadic, and you will have to work to have more and more of those moments. Because when we left the garden, the relationship with God that was once light and easy became something that we would have to work to pursue. And that's just part of the consequences of our fallen world. But let's look at an example of someone in the Bible who delighted in God. I want to take a moment to look at what it looks like to delight in God and what we can learn from this story. So let's talk about the sister who delighted in Jesus. There are so many incredible women in the Bible, and half of them are named Mary. It seems like the Mary I want to learn from today has a sister and a brother. And her brother is famous too. He was brought back to life after dying by Jesus. Okay, Jesus brought him back to life. This story that we're going to read today takes place before that miracle. This Mary is also the same woman that anointed Jesus's feet with oil in an act of worship. This story we're going to read today also takes place before that. But in John 11:5, we're told, it says this: "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister, Mary, who we're talking about, and Lazarus." This is a special family, okay? A very special family. And this story has so much that we can learn. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 10 to read about Martha and Mary. Here's what it says in verse 38. It says, "Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her.'" So I grew up in a really small town called Dangerfield, Texas, and I went to First Baptist Church at Dangerfield. And in our church, there was a season where we had 2 church secretaries. And back then we called them secretaries. They're now administrative assistants, and I affirm and applaud that change. But these were secretaries, okay? And it was funny because they were named Mary and Martha. So our church secretaries were named Mary and Martha. And so people brought this up all the time. And the woman named Martha, she said, "Oh, my entire life I've wanted to be Mary." She didn't hate, but she was sad that her namesake was the one who wasn't worshiping God and who was busy and who was serving and missing out on what Jesus was doing. She's like, on my whole life, I just wanted to be Mary, but my name is Martha. And when you read this story, it's easy to see why a person would rather be compared to Mary and not Martha, which is kind of wild because Martha sometimes gets painted as this really off focus, wasn't honoring God type of person. But she was literally opening up her home to these strangers who had been traveling, and she was feeding and caring for this group of smelly, road worn guys. It's not wild that she was serving. And we can learn some stuff from Martha as well. But these 2 women can teach us so much about delighting in God, starting with Mary, the one who delighted in Jesus. The key to delighting in God is found in stillness, this idea of still standing, taking a moment to breathe, to focus on God. It says Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet. Mary, whose sister was running around, taking care of things, trying to make everything perfect. Mary sat at Jesus's feet. And before we're done today, I'm going to give you some practical things you can do to sit and listen to Jesus. But we need to remember that the key to delighting in God is found in the stillness. Now, it was easy for Mary. Jesus was literally right there teaching her. Like, it can't be that hard to enjoy and focus on God when he's sitting right in front of you. And for us, it'll take more effort. But I don't want you to forget this idea of stillness is key. And Mary exemplifies that. Her delight in Jesus was rooted in her choice to be still in front of him. But let's talk for a moment about the sister who couldn't delight in Jesus, who struggled to delight. You know, when delight is hard to come by, when we're thinking about a relationship with God, there's got to be a reason. There's a reason. For Martha, it says, but Martha was distracted by much serving. And then Jesus says, you are anxious and troubled by many things. While her sister was sitting still, Martha was too busy to listen. And yes, it was good. And she was serving and being a gracious host, but she was too busy. She was too busy to listen to God. She may have heard some of the teachings, but she wouldn't stop long enough to truly enjoy Christ. Before we can delight in God, we must figure out why we are struggling. Martha's problem is plain and dry to us. We're reading it, we see it, Jesus called her out on it, and I'm sure she never forgot that lesson. Martha was busy doing good, but even good things can get in the way of our delight. So some of you may be just too busy. You're not stopping, you're not pausing to enjoy God. For others, it may be something sinful that's getting in the way of your delight in God. It's something that you know is wrong, but you're finding some sort of enjoyment or even borderline love of something that is actually wrong. And you know it's wrong, or God's trying to teach you that it's wrong. But until we overcome whatever barrier we have between us and delighting in God, we're never going to be able to really love God, to take joy in him, to delight in him. I have a confession to make. There is a TV show that I used to watch the first few seasons pretty regularly. I didn't have kids. I don't think I was married at the time. And I'm a sucker for shows about situations that are unique, to where I can learn about something that's curious or, fascinating. And so there's this show. It was on TLC, of course, the Learning Channel, which is, I think, come a long way from its original roots of learning and become more reality garbage. But this show was called CityRise, and it still exists today. And so without going too much into detail, it gave us a glimpse of a Mormon polygamous family, which, you kind of grew up hearing about them, but you never get to see inside what's going on. And this family, of course, was, honestly, very other than that, very moral and upstanding. Like, they didn't go into details about some of the private things going on, but they opened up their home to let us see what it was like to have all these different people living together. In the first season, this man has 3 wives. And of course, he feels called by God to bring in a younger wife, and he gets a 4th wife. And that's how the show starts. And so most of the seasons is them trying to figure that out and the bumps along the road. I will say 19 years later, all of the wives have left him, but the one that he brought on, which we get. Like, it makes sense. 1, it's a sin. 2, it's illogical to think that one human can adequately love 3 or 4 different women in the way that God calls us to. It's not possible. And so us watching, we're like, of course, this wasn't going to work. It's sinful and it's illogical. But after 19 seasons, this man is now alone with his 1 wife. And I think for me, as I was researching this, I realized that I think a lot of us struggle to delight in God because our affections are divided. We know that marriage works best with 1 man and 1 woman because that's all we have capacity to love. That's all we have the ability to do in this life, is love that one person as best as possible. When you start trying to divide your affections, all those relationships are going to suffer. And the TV show showed us that. But your struggle to delight in God is most likely due to your divided heart. And this doesn't have to be a sin. It doesn't have to be that you're sinning and you're more interested in sin than God. We're trying to love our spouses and our kids and our jobs and our friends and a million other things. We're trying to give all of these different things equal attention. And sometimes, though, we're trying to delight in God while still delighting in sin, and that's a problem. But the bottom line is your affections are probably divided. If you're struggling to delight in God, It's because your joy is being divided amongst all these different things instead of giving it first to God. Yes, our spouse, our kids, our jobs, those are all good things that deserve our attention and our joy and all of those things. But if we're putting more effort into those people and things than we are into God, then that's a problem. Like that's the issue. It's like a man trying to be married to multiple people. The relationships are going to fail. In the same way, if you're trying to equally connect with God and your spouse and your kids and your job and your hobbies and your friends, your affections are divided and you're going to struggle to give God what he needs, the attention that you need to connect with him and delight in him. In the same way, our earthly love for our spouse should be above and beyond any other relationship. Our love of God should be above and beyond our love of anyone and anything. Or put more simply, be married to God, be friends with everything else. Once again, and when you scale it on an earthly level, yes, your spouse is first and foremost and your kids are important, but ultimately all of these good things your love for them needs to pale in comparison to your love for God and your devotion to him and the work you're putting in to connect with him. But I'd be willing to bet that you're putting way more effort into your spouse and your kids and your job than you are in God right now. And that's probably why you're not delighting in him. And I am right there with you. It is so much more demanding. Our relationships, our spouses, our kids, our jobs, they demand our attention. And so we have to intentionally turn our affection and attention to God and make him more of our focus than these other things and people. But once you're certain you've diagnosed what's keeping you from delighting in God, whether it's your relationships or your job or some sort of sin area, once you've diagnosed those areas and you've dealt with them, you're ready to learn how to love him. You've got to deal with those things first, though. But we're learning to love. Now, it might be difficult for you to believe, but we must learn how to love. It does not come naturally. Now, you may reject this idea because you feel that, well, no one taught me to love my parents or love my spouse. I just had feelings of love for them. No one taught me that. But if you believe love is a feeling and not something you learn, then I could see why you're confused about this point. But here's the deal. The ability to love and delight in someone day in and day out is a skill that is learned, not a feeling that endures. So to delight in God, we must learn how to love him. James K. Smith says this in his book, You Are What You Love. We learn to love then not primarily by acquiring information about what we should love, but rather through practices that form the habits how we love. These sorts of practices are pedagogies of desire, not because they are like lectures that inform us, but because they are rituals that form and direct our affections. Rituals that form and direct our affections. To truly love God, we need rituals to direct our affections. So if you still don't believe me, let's think of any intimate relationship you have, whether it's platonic or romantic. I'm not trying to exclude people who aren't married. You can get love as well. You're not ignorant of that. So think of any meaningful relationship you have, an intimate relationship, more than just an acquaintance, could be platonic, could be romantic. Listen, you spend time with them intentionally and often if you have affection for them. That's just something you do. Maybe it's date nights if it's someone you're romantically involved in, or it's friend hangouts with someone that you're connected with as a friend, but you intentionally spend time with them. Another ritual you do is you commemorate milestones in their life. You give them gifts for their birthdays. You go out to dinner to celebrate new and exciting things in their life. You have milestones you commemorate together and you celebrate them. Another ritual you have with these relationships to keep them strong is you plan trips and shared activities to foster a deeper connection and build shared memories. With your spouse, it's romantic getaways. With your friends, it's a girls' trip to the beach. You're making intentional choices to spend time with them, building memories in shared activities. Another ritual you do to maintain your affection and enthusiasm about your relationships is you check in regularly to see how they're doing. With friends, you text or call a few times a week. With your significant other, it's every day. At the end of the day, you check in. You're connecting with them intentionally. We have rituals in our lives that foster and enable our delight in those that we care most about. We have rituals. We have rituals that we do that stir up affection and delight in the people we love. It's natural. But just because it's natural doesn't mean you didn't learn it. Okay. We learned that celebrating birthdays is important because our parents celebrated birthdays. If no one ever talked about celebrating your birthday growing up, you would have never known it was a ritual worth doing that would inspire love and affection for the person that you're celebrating with. But it does. We learn that experiences and shared activities inspire a deeper love for these people because our most fond memories of our parents are doing things with them and going places with them. We learn that that ritual is important to inspire affection. Just because you've known these rituals for a long time doesn't mean you didn't have to be taught them. And so if you're walking in or you're thinking, well, I shouldn't have to learn how to love God, it should come naturally. And if it's not natural, it must not be real. That's not true. Our love for friends and significant others will flounder when we let go of some of these basic rituals that I mentioned. So why would we think our love for God would be different? Why would we think that inherently we would know how to enjoy him and we wouldn't have to learn how to spend time with him? Because every relationship we have, we learned how to nurture and enjoy. So we got to learn them. So let's talk about the rituals that lead to delight. Okay? Because we cannot expect our delight in God to be firm and constant without intentional rituals. We're all wired differently, so one ritual I'm about to list may not work for everyone the same. What your job is to do is just try them all, okay? And for a season, something may work, and then when that stops working, you find a different thing. But it's on us to find the rituals that work best for us, that inspire our joy of God. Here's several. There's probably more, but some of them are basic. Some of them are maybe new to you. Bible study, of course, reading the Bible. Singing songs to God can inspire affection in a lot of us. Fellowship with other believers. This one's huge for me. My joy in God grows exponentially when I'm walking with someone else in the faith. Like fellowship is important to me. Marvel, not the movies, but this idea of marveling at God's creation, getting into nature, looking up at the stars, getting away from the noise of the city, marveling at God's creation can inspire affection and enjoyment and delight in a lot of us. Prayer, talking to God, not just asking him for things, but telling him about your day, telling him about what you're struggling with. That's a way to inspire delight in you with God. Fasting, taking a break from something. It's the Lenten season. It's a great time to take a break from something that has become too important to you, or fasting from food for a few days to see what that's like. But fasting can inspire delight in God because it reminds you of how much you need him more than those other things. Memorizing the Bible verses, like that's going to inspire some affection for some of you. Serving other people, going out of your way to care for others, that's going to inspire affection for God for a lot of us. Evangelism, talking about God, talking about what he did on the cross to other people, that can inspire our affection and our delight. Journaling about what God's teaching you, sitting in silence and letting God talk to you. But if your delight in God has faded because you think the only way you can connect with him is through the Bible and through prayer, then now you have no excuses. There are almost infinite ways to connect with God in a way that inspires us to delight in him, but we have to do them. We have to go out of our way to do them. All of these are rituals that you can incorporate in your life to inspire your love of God. So start working through the list until you find what works, and then do that for a while. And then when that ritual loses effectiveness, find another one. Your life is going to change. Seasons are changing. Like find what works for you and do that to connect with God and inspire your affection and delight for him. And then move on to something else when that stops working the same way. And so we've talked about all these things about delighting in God, that if we divide our affections, it's going to be hard. Affection for God is found in stillness and in intentional rituals. But you may be still wondering, why even bother? Like, why delight in God? Like, why does it matter? Like, why does it matter? If I must work at delighting in God, then why even put forth the effort? Psalm 34:8 says this, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him." You will never know what you're missing if you never try to get to know God. You're never going to know that it doesn't taste good to follow Jesus until you actually taste it for yourself. And we taste the goodness of God through all of these rituals, through prayer, through fasting, through meditation, through marveling at his nature. Those are the ways that we taste and see that the Lord is good. You will never know what you're missing if you never try to get to know God. So that's why bother, number one. Second, why bother delighting in God? Number two, the second half of this verse says, "And he will give you the desires of your heart." Why bother delighting in God? Because when you do, you're promised the desires of your heart. You're promised that he's going to come through on those things that you care most about. But God only says no to things that are not good for us. So this verse has been abused in many different ways. Prosperity gospel preachers have said, well, if you do this, God will bless you, whatever. It's not like that. What's happening is the more you delight in God, the more your desires change to things of the Lord, and he's happy to give those things to you. He can't wait to give those things from you. The further we are from him, the more we desire things that are bad and not good, and he's not interested in giving us those things. The closer we are, the more we delight in him, our heart's going to change to be the things of the Lord, and he's happy to give those things to us. When we delight in God, he changes the desires of our heart to match his. And suddenly we start getting everything our heart desires because our heart desires the things he desires. Okay, that's the promise at the end. So why bother? One, you'll never know how good God is until you try. You'll never know how much you can delight in him until you put forth the effort to spend that time with him. But two, why bother? Because when you delight in God, you get the desires of your heart. Your heart changes, and suddenly God, day after day, is going to be giving you the desires of your heart because they're the things that he desires. It's a win-win situation. So I want you to do something. First of all, I want you to become a Christ follower. If you're not a Christian, you can try to connect with God all you want, but if you don't have an actual relationship with him through Jesus, it's not going to work. It's like saying you're dating someone you've never actually spoken to. Okay. It's like saying, oh yeah, I'm dating this girl, but you've never actually gone on a date with her. It's the same with God. You can say, oh, I love God, but if you don't become a Christian, you don't have a relationship because the Bible says that Jesus is the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except through him. Accepting his salvation, admitting that you're a sinner, believing that Christ died for your sins and making him Lord of your life opens up a world of delight. Even just that is going to cause you to delight in God. But become a Christian because it's impossible to truly delight in God without a relationship with him. That only comes through Christ. Next, do something. I want you to pick one ritual to try out this week. And if that doesn't do anything, try another. And if that doesn't do anything, try another. There's like 10 or 15,000 different options. It's not that many, but there's a lot of different options. And so I want you to try something. So as we close, that's what we're going to do. We're going to choose our ritual now together. So for the last minute, there's going to be some music playing and a video on the screen. And it's literally going to be the different ways that you can connect with God and delight in him better this week. It's different rituals that if you would try, they might have the potential to help you delight in him. And if that one doesn't work, move to another one. But intentionally spending time with God in one of these ways has the power to increase your delight. So for this last minute, all I'm asking you to do is pick one of these things. And you can close out the screen whenever you want because you're at home. But I really want you to take time and look at this video and look at the different options and think, what's one thing I can feasibly do this week that could potentially inspire my affection for God, to cause me to delight in him? And then do that thing. Do that thing this week and see what happens. God is not a ATM machine. It's not like you put something in and you get something out or whatever. Like it's not an exchange. It's not a vending machine, I guess I should say. But there are certain practices that if you do, he's faithful to show up because scripture says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And so use this last minute to decide what that is and make a commitment to do it this week.